Hey, Joe, how are you? Great to see you.
Well, it's equally as good to see you, my friend.
Awesome. It's an absolute honor to speak with you today. Your career is still young, and amazingly, you've already broadcast 24 World Series, 22 MLB All-Star games, 6 Super Bowls, and earlier in your career, you called baseball games for your hometown St. Louis Cardinals from 91 through 2007. And no question, many more milestones to follow. Joe, like so many of us, you've been directly touched by cancer, including your dad, Hall of Fame broadcaster Jack, who suffered from lung cancer in his later years. Thank you so much for joining me today for our first interview on 10 questions for cancer research and supporting our efforts to raise funds for the fight against cancer.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I would do it under any circumstance, but when you bring up, my dad's lung cancer, and I'm happy to talk through that. My wife Michelle has been through melanoma. There's nobody walking the planet of a certain age that has not been touched by cancer. And so every year when you talk about 24 World Series, at least for the last 20, I feel like in the fifth inning of game four, usually three or four, we do a stand up to cancer moment. And it's sad, but there have been years where I've had to pick from a number of people I could have written on that card that they show on national TV and on the scoreboard, uh, to let them know that I and we are pulling for him. So I remember my dad. I remember it like it was yesterday. Him calling my wife and me. We were in Miami, Florida. We had just gotten there. I got a message to call my dad, and he said, "Well," and he had been going through a lot. He had Parkinson's and diabetes and a pacemaker and a million different things. But when he picked up the phone after I called him, I hadn't heard him that strong in a long time. And he said, "Well, been diagnosed with lung cancer. We're going to clean it up, take care of it, and everything will be all right." And, the funny thing was that he went in for this lung cancer, kind of a recession of the bottom part of his lung on one side. And that really was taken care of. The cancer was taken care of. It was infection and other things that ended his life. But I just remember, being there in that moment when kind of the avalanche hits and the rocks start falling on your head, like, oh my God, my dad has lung cancer. And it was much the same feeling when my wife Michelle was like, I've got melanoma. They're going to, gouge this piece out of the back of my shoulder and everything's going to be okay. And you take the positive attitude, but you just don't know. And I would say that we've all been touched, and anything I can do to help raise awareness or funds or anything, I'm always all in.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, within the last 2 years, it was so funny. My sister, who was very healthy, good athlete, pretty girl, and she gets diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And I'm like, wow, I knew it was serious. She was up in New York being treated up there, best hospital and everything. And, about 3 months later, I find out I've got some stuff going on. And I was like, I'm not even going to tell my family, right? I mean, we've got enough going on here. And certainly her case was much more serious than mine. But really the first time, you ever really get hit with this stuff. And, we've all been close to it, but when it hits a family member, you're like, and then it hit me and you're kind of like, wow, this is it. But hey, it's everywhere. We've made so much progress treating cancer, but, obviously, when I see what happened with my sister and such a long way to go. I've greatly benefited from previous cancer research, which is fantastic, but certainly a long way to go.
Well, I think back to when I got involved here in St. Louis with Children's Hospital, and we were young parents, and my daughter Natalie was, I don't know, 3, and they were testing her for cystic fibrosis. And I remember going into Children's Hospital, totally separate story, separate idea, except that it reminded me or drove home the point that I had heard even before I became a parent, which was we are all one MRI or CAT scan away from our lives changing entirely. And anybody who is listening to this, or really anywhere as an adult, who doesn't realize that has got their head in the sand. So again, I mean, we're making great progress. I say we, I have nothing to do with it except for the money that I raise for Children's Hospital and different foundations. But uh, thank God the medical community in the United States is what it is. It continues to be robust. They continue to push boundaries and they continue to find cures. And so what once was a death sentence is no longer in many cases. And that should give all of us hope. But that doesn't mean that the fight and the effort should not continue. They should probably just push the pedal down and make everybody go even harder.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny. When I was up in New York, my wife and I were very involved with Ronald McDonald House in New York City. We'd see a lot of these poor little kids. I remember they called it neuroblastoma, which is
Mm,
basically sort of cancer of the brain. And when we first got there, probably in the late 90s, most of those kids were not living through that. But I'd say 8 to 9 years later, a lot of those kids were surviving. So, I mean, we've made so many good strides in medical research and treating cancer, but obviously a long way to go.
yep. Well, and I think the message is out there though, and I think through the different sports that I've done, and baseball's taken, I no longer do baseball, but baseball's taken a leadership role with a stand up to cancer and that combination with MasterCard, and then Keep Dad in the Game, which is for prostate cancer, which every year we would have Michael Milken in the booth. He would talk about his efforts, the foundation that he put together. There was a matching situation with home runs and dollars raised per home run during the month of I guess it would be June for Father's Day. And so that since everybody's been touched, that's the sad thing, but it also means that everybody's got a reason to do what they can to make things better. And so that's where I tend to put my focus is on the making things better. And I think we're doing a lot of good things.
Yeah, no, I will just say you do a really nice job in your book when you talked about kind of your dad's final days and going through that process. And it's funny because I think since I've been on this medication, I get very emotional, and I definitely had some tears in my eyes, just going through that as my dad died, and I know how tough those last few days are. But I thought you did a really nice job of covering that. And look, we've got to just stay on this stuff, and thankfully you're here today, and hopefully we can raise some money to fight all this.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. And I know you've got 10 questions. I'm a little intimidated by the whole idea of 10 questions from Chris O'Gorman, but I'm happy to just sit here and get pelted with questions and see if I can come up with any good answers.
Joe, let me tell you how smart I am. I've never interviewed anybody in my life, and I'm starting out with a sports broadcaster in the Hall of Fame. That's how smart.
Well, you are smart. You're about 100 times smarter than me. So I would bet on you rather than me.
You'll get me through this, bud. I know that. So let me get official on you. And some of my questions are long. At any point, if you want to cut me off, go ahead. But we'll try and get some good information out of you. Okay. I've been fortunate to play golf with you a few times. You're a good player, long-time low single digits, scratch golfer. Currently, you cover Monday Night Football for ESPN with your longtime partner in the booth, Troy Aikman. The last few years, you've taken the baseball season off. I would think that's favorable for your golf game. However, I'm also aware that you and your wife, Michelle, are the parents of twin 6-year-old boys. And I know that last week was a busy one, birthday-wise, in the Buck household. Happy birthday to you and the twins.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, think about the math. I just turned 55. My twins just turned 6. I've got one daughter who's 27 getting married in January, and I'm still putting a baby boy of mine in a pull-up to go to sleep at night. So I've got them coming. I've got them going. I've got one getting married. I've got one or two of them that are just pummeling the hell out of each other, fighting like brothers do. I'm realizing the difference in raising little boys versus little girls. If you're asking which is easier, my answer is girls, especially when they're younger. I do not have the patience or stamina or dexterity to take care of twin 6-year-old boys who are way faster and in some cases stronger than me. But yeah, the golf game has been good and bad, like everybody else with golf. There's some good moments that you remember. There's some moments where you want to throw your clubs in a lake, and I've come extremely close to doing exactly that. Not to be dramatic, but pretty close. And the baseball thing is weird. It's so a part of my DNA, being my dad's son. Hall of Fame broadcaster with the Cardinals. His face is on the outfield wall at Busch Stadium because they continue to honor him, which is wonderful. And I've been lucky enough to do all those World Series and All-Star games, and been a local guy, but a national guy. I think at some point, and I did it for 35 years, it's okay to just kind of move to the next chapter. Doesn't mean I don't love it. Doesn't mean that baseball is not on my TV at night. It doesn't mean anything. In fact, it's made me more of a fan because now I can kind of openly root for my hometown team. Last year they finished in last place. This year they're in last place as you and I talk right now, but it's just fun to be a fan again. And I think the national stuff took some of that fun away because, you and I played up in Wingfoot, and you get a Yankee fan that's like, "Hey, Buck, why do you hate the Yankees?" And then you get a Mets fan in the corner. "Oh, you think he hates the Yankees? He hates the Mets." And then you go to Boston and you get Red Sox fans saying the same thing because you're constantly being excited while if their team gives up a home run, you're yelling and excited about it, which they don't hear from their hometown announcers, and their mind, and I get it, naturally goes to, well, he doesn't like my team, which is crazy. So kind of eliminating that stress has been nice. And the game has changed. I mean, they went to this pitch clock, which I think is a good thing. They've tried to speed things up. And I just remember sitting at Yankee Stadium or Fenway for 4.5 hours going, can we try the pitch clock now, like before the end of the game? Because this game's taken a long time. I've loved what I've done, but I think it was just time to kind of move to the next chapter.
Yeah, I'll say a couple things. I don't think any games took longer than the Yankees and the Red Sox.
Oh,
They were just unbelievable.
but you
And
know what? Nobody was complaining that they were too long because they were awesome. I
yeah,
mean, they were great, fun, crazy games. And at time, you ride the tension of a game, and those things were just tight. Even the blowouts, because you just were expecting somebody to get hit or something that was going to ignite everybody. So
yeah,
they were awesome. And I miss those games. Miss those games a lot. I miss those games from the early 2000s and the LCS in 03 and 04. And I've got some unbelievable memories from Yankee Stadium, old Yankee Stadium, and certainly Fenway.
yeah. I think the only thing is, I'm not sure if you go back to Wingfoot, you're going to get much of a reprieve because as you and I had a great day of golf that day at Wingfoot, we walked in probably into the grill room on a Saturday afternoon, a little bit late. I think there was a group there that had been pretty well served, and they were mostly getting on you about the Giants. They assumed
Oh
that
yeah, then you get that too. Yeah,
and the cars are big at Wingfoot and everything. So you got it pretty good that day. I felt a little bad, but it was all in good fun. That's for
yeah,
sure.
it is. And at some point, the the logical thought would be, and the compliment is that people care. And people know that you're there, and people know who you are, and people know that when you're calling the game, it's probably a big game. So there's a lot of compliments that are kind of baked into all that stuff, but the fragile kid in me is always like, oh, I don't hate your team. I want you to like me, but that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, I get you. I get you. All right. Let's talk a little bit of golf. Let's stay on golf. Sorry, apologize in advance. A little bit of a long question, but pretty interesting situation. So, in August of 2013, Fox shocked the sports world with the announcement of a mind-blowing $1.1 billion contract to broadcast USGA events for the 12-year period 2015 through 2026. The annual average cost of Fox of approximately $92 million towered above the previous NBC ESPN annual cost, reportedly of $37 million. It was a bold and risky move, which was not at all unusual for the network. Given your love for the game of golf, I know that you were thrilled with the opportunity to broadcast U.S. Opens. By 2020, the world had changed thanks to the pandemic. The USJ was moving the US Open from June to the fall, which would conflict with Fox's NFL, college football, and MLB coverage. Fox was reportedly losing millions each year on its golf coverage, and the relationship with the USJ seemed at times to be unsteady. NBC stepped in to take on the remainder of the contract for a reported price of slightly more than their previous cost of $37 million. Fox covered the difference in contract price, resulting in a multi-hundred million dollar loss. Joe, can you talk a little bit about Fox's initial decision to move into golf, your experience of covering 5 US Opens, and the final decision for Fox to walk away from the contract?
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about this stuff for hours. I just this specific question, it's you laid it out really well and better than I could have, and I lived through it. Um, it was the first time that, and I remember Eric Shanks, my boss at Fox, saying we finally kept something quiet when they got the rights, because I was as informed as anybody at the network, at least at my in my job description as the play-by-play announcer, that they would tap on the shoulder to go do all their big stuff. And they got the rights, and as you said, they had to overpay to get them, to kind of get them away from NBC. I think it was also a play for FS1 to get to have the early golf each day be on the cable side of Fox Sports, which they were trying to build up. So I think it made a lot of sense. When they came to me, I was flattered, excited, scared, because I didn't know what I didn't know. I'd never done golf. I've played a ton of golf, but that doesn't mean you can broadcast it. And you don't know the mechanics until you sit in that chair. And while it would be, I think, intuitive or logical for you and me, at least me, before I started doing golf, to think, oh, well, it's slow. It's golf. People fall asleep to it on the couch. You watch the Masters as much for the tranquility as you watch it for the golf and the actual sport. At least I do. I think it's beautiful just on my TV with the green, the colors, and everything else. So they asked me, I reached out to Mike Tirico, and I said, how do you broadcast golf? I have no idea. How do I do research? And so it was a getting to know the sport. And then you sit in that chair, and not only are you on for a long time, I mean, sometimes 8 hours a day,
Uh-huh.
and we're great friends with Mark Loomis, who's another Wingfoot member and was our producer at Fox, who is just awesome as a human being and a great producer. But he's teaching me and Greg Norman and Steve Flesh and Scott McCarron and people how to broadcast golf on TV. And it goes very fast because your back is to the course. You're not watching any of it live. You're sitting in a studio. So I could do it theoretically from my basement. It wouldn't be any different. And you're going off monitors with Mark Loomis, or at different times of the day, others telling you, okay, we're going to 4. It's Spieth putting for birdie. He's coming off a double at, 3. And so you're just constantly doing these mental gymnastics of going, okay, now we're going to Spieth on 4. He's putting for birdie. He's coming off a double on 3. And then if any of that information's not right, and you've got a producer who's relying on a young person out there who's watching and radioing in what's going on, well, I don't like that feeling. I want to make my own mistakes. I want to see it with my eyes. I want to put my own mind to what I'm looking at. So it's a long-winded way of saying I loved it. I love being around the driving range, or as they say in the USGA, the practice tee. I loved learning a new vocabulary because, God forbid, you say it's a trap, it's a bunker, blah, 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 on down the line. I loved getting to understand the mechanics, but when you're the new people on the block and everybody's used to NBC or CBS, people are like, well, these guys don't know what the hell they're doing, and their camera people aren't any good. Yet the camera people were the same people that were, daytime hires by all the other networks. They knew exactly what they were doing. Our first one was at Chambers Bay, which was really hard to see the ball because the grass and the glare off the water, and And so I think it was jarring for people. I would say that we got to a point by our last one, by our fifth, that I walked out of Pebble Beach like, I think that was actually really good. And Nance was in our booth for a while, and Jim's a great friend, and he walked out of the booth. He said, "Hey, I just want to tell you, you guys are coming up with. I live here. You guys are coming up with shots I've never seen on our
Mm,
coverage of the Pebble Beach Pro Am or anything we've done. You know, hanging drones off the cliff and just different stuff, trying to push it forward. So I'm
yeah.
proud of everything we did. I was not heartbroken when it went away. I'm glad I did it. I met a lot of great people who have remained dear friends. And it was 5 years of getting to understand how hard it is to do golf and how much more appreciative I should be of those who do it really well. And I'm talking about Jim, at least from my seat. Jim, who's the best ever. And Dan Hicks, who's phenomenal. Tarico, who's great and can do everything. But it's hard to make that feel seamless and to build in the drama with different every hole's a different game. And so there's a lot going into it, but I'm glad I did it and I'm glad I don't do it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember Chambers Bay. I mean, it was number one, it was your first one, but I think I remember the topography of that course. I mean, it was almost I don't know if they could ever go back and broadcast. I mean, the up and downs of those slopes. I mean, that might have been the toughest US Open venue to ever broadcast a tournament, I would think.
Yeah, it was like pulling out of your driveway onto the highway. It was like, here we go. Everybody's going 75 miles an hour. And then it was a real thing. The glare, just the color of the grass, and you become defensive. I remember being defensive because it was Chambers Bay was getting a lot of, forget us for a minute. Chambers Bay was getting a lot of criticism. And I was like, come on, everybody get over yourselves. It's golf, and whatever it is, we're going to cover it. Eventually somebody's going to win this thing, and they're going to be a US Open champion. It happened to be Jordan Spieth with a little 3-putt by Dustin Johnson on 18 on Sunday. But it was tough to see the golf ball. And
Yeah.
and when you're doing an event like that, and then you got a bunch of newbies like me and Greg and Fleshy and all these different people, Fax. I mean, he was pretty new to the whole thing. And so yeah, it was a big challenge, but I like that. I like challenges and I like trying to get over that hurdle, learn, get better, do it again, learn, get better. And like I said, by the time we got to the end of it, I felt like we were pushing the technology way forward, and those of us who were talking got a lot better.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, definitely I had touched base with Mark last week on some of this. And I said, look, Fox was known for being innovative. You guys were innovative, and you touched on some of it. You guys were the first ones to, put mics in the cups to pick up player conversations. The ever present, now I love it, the mini leaderboard in the lower right hand corner of TV screens. That's awesome. You walk in, you know exactly who's winning. As you said, the drone footage. And I think the biggest thing, I remember Mark telling me about the tracers. He said, that's pretty expensive technology, but you guys just said, hey, let's do it. And I mean, tracers are used everywhere in golf coverage now, and it just makes the coverage so much better.
It does. I mean, if you can't, there's no way. As great as technology is, they say hockey's hard to follow. I mean, seeing a golf ball leave the face of a golf club with a shot, the typical shot from behind, you have no idea where it's going. And to have that tracer there, I mean, look, I was at Fox for 28 years. And of all the things I was most proud of were my relationships with the people that I worked with, and the I think the mentality of saying at times, we don't care the cost. We're going to make the production level better. Whether
Yeah.
it was it's microphones in the second base bag and in the outfield wall and the foul pole, where we're in the World Series and somebody hits a home run off the right field foul pole and you hear bong, and now we're all used to the double doink in football and all that stuff. That stuff didn't just happen. Some network, and it was Fox, said, we're going to put microphones where they've never been before. and fans at home are going to hear things they've never heard before. And that was the stuff that when you walk out of the stadium on certain days, certain nights, you're like, that was a moment that nobody's ever seen before on their couch. And that's what made me so proud of for almost 3 decades being at Fox.
Yeah, no, just that's great. One more question on this. We can move ahead, but and I'll read this so I get it right. Say, hey, Joe, you're the face of the broadcast, but ultimately there's only so much that you can control. What's it like for you to know that you and your team had just put together great coverage of a US Open, Pebble Beach? Yet you know at the end of the day, the network is losing money on the event. Is that somewhat deflating or something that's just out of your control?
I don't like it. Um, yeah, I say it takes a little bit of the polish off of it if you feel like, well, it was really good. It got good. And now our CEO, who was as much my friend as he was boss, Eric Shanks, or prior to him, David Hill, is going to have to go into a meeting and go, the reviews were great, but we just lost X number of millions of dollars. And that's, I don't like that. I mean, and that's why, I would always do interviews with Chris Mad Dog Russo during the World Series. And sometimes the story was awesome with regard to the ratings. Sometimes the matchup or it's a 4-game sweep, the rating story wasn't good. I hate that stuff because you feel like your fingerprints are on it, and you don't get the high when the rating's up, but you sure get the low when the ratings are down. And that's a hard thing in our business. At least it is for me because I take everything personally.
Sure, sure. I get you. Okay. Let's stick with golf for a couple more. As we all know, Live Golf has managed to sign some of the top players in the world to incredibly lucrative contracts, several of whom would otherwise be top players on the PGA Tour. This has obviously created a serious competitive threat for the tour. The man leading Live, Greg Norman, as you indicated, was your former Fox broadcast partner for about a year and a half. Fox fired Greg from its coverage in January of 2016. Fair or unfair, there was media criticism of Greg's work at Fox in terms of being a little light on player research, being somewhat reticent during the broadcast, claims that were later refuted by Greg. Joe, can you provide some insight as to your working experience with Greg at Fox and your thoughts overall on the Live Golf product?
Yeah, I mean, this is one where I can just speak to what I know, and that is, I remember when we were paired together, and I'm 55 years old, and I'm a golf fan, so it's like, my God, I'm going to work with Greg Norman, like that's unbelievable. I mean, that's like a titan of the sport, and I remember he called me and said, "Hey, we're going to do a practice U.S. Open in Carolina. Uh, I'll pick you up. I'll land in St. Louis on my way from Colorado. I'll pick you up, and we'll fly there in my plane." I was like,
Whoa.
"Wow, this is something." And so along those lines, I mean, I can just tell you, I never had one instance where he and I were cross with each other, or I didn't get along with him or any of that. I think you have to celebrate him for his tremendous golf career. He's a self-made whatever he is, hundreds of millionaire person, and he's a disruptor. And that's what this is. And they went after somebody, meaning, Live went after somebody, in my opinion, that they felt, and I think they chose wisely in this, somebody who could take the criticism and somebody who could be out in front of that charge and kind of fend that off and still keep plowing ahead. I, like you, am a huge fan of the sport and of the sport on TV. And in the current state, it's not as good as it was. And that's saying nothing because we all feel that way. I mean, the people involved feel that way. I'm sure, everybody from the tour side, from the live side, know that each week the best are not playing against the best. And so, however that has to get rectified and fixed, I hope it comes to pass. And I hope what I read, and I have no more information on it than anybody else, but that Rory was rewarded for his loyalty to the PGA Tour. Tiger was rewarded for his loyalty to the PGA Tour. Players were rewarded for saying no and trying to make sure that the PGA Tour just didn't collapse altogether. But um, that's it. Greg is a disruptor in a business sense, in the good sense. You can disagree with the entire charge of what Live is about, who funds Live, and what that's about. But that was Greg's assignment, was to make this thing happen, and so he's done that. And now, as we all sit here, at least the fans of the tour and golf, as we feel it should be, want this thing to be joined back together and let's go forward. And I want to see John Rahm take on Rory McIlroy. I want to see Brooks Koepka in the same arena, other than in majors, taking on Justin Thomas. I mean, you can go on and on and on. I want to see the best against the best, and that's not how it is anymore.
Yeah, yeah, no. Look, I agree. I'm a huge fan. For most of my life, I've just always enjoyed watching a lot of golf on TV, and we're suffering because of that. We're not getting to see the best. But it's funny because the thought that hit me was, younger generations will just recognize Greg Norman as the live villain, right? And they'll never realize what a good player he was. I mean, I've just got a couple of his stats here. 20 PGA Tour victories, 31 second place finishes on the tour, 71 international wins, top ranked golfer in the world for 331 weeks, second only to Tiger at 683, Dustin Johnson, a distant third at 139 weeks, two open victories, one players championship. And, probably the biggest thing is the 8 runner-up championships in the majors, 8 runners up in the majors, 30 top 10 finishes in the majors. And, the owner of the 1986 Saturday Slam, where he had the lead for all 4 majors after 3 rounds, and I think only won the Open that year. So, I mean, but we remember him growing up. I mean, the guy was just a really, really good player. And
He
younger,
brought cool. I mean, to me, he brought cool, and like kind of he was like a leading man, and it's like, okay, not only is this guy a self-taught phenomenal player, but he's also bringing cool to the sport. And he just had a look and a way and a nickname and, everything else that you kind of like. And I just remember being a kid rooting for him. You talk about 86, rooting for him every time to win every single one of those times.
yeah.
And the heartbreak at Augusta is just, it's hard to wrap your head around, with somebody that was that good at that time, to not close that out. So, you can go on and on and on. I just hope that that, like you, I mean, there's two sides to his life, and the golf side of it and the player side of it. Yes, he had heartbreak. Yes, he had those second place finishes, but he also, as you said, was the number 1 player in the world for over 300 weeks and is number 2 to Tiger Woods. There's a body of work there that, except for Tiger, is unlike anybody else's. So there's a lot of good and bad, as there is with everybody else. And I just hope that at the end of this, they all come back together and Greg can be, kind of welcomed back in some way, because it's, as you said, this is a really hot button situation for very good reason. And if them coming back together is the best thing for the PGA Tour, which I think it is, then I hope to God it happens.
Yeah, yeah. We'll just stay in there for 1 minute. We'll talk about the golf ratings, which are down about 20% this year. The Masters viewership confirming those numbers recently. No question that fair amount of fans have tuned out given the big money fight with Liv. Is it a temporary blip? Certainly possible. Last month, Rory said, I know this isn't a be all end all, but if you look at the TV ratings of the PGA Tour this year, they're down 20% across the board. That's a fifth. That's big. I just think with the fighting and everything that's went on over the past couple of years, people are just getting really fatigued of it, and it's turning people off men's professional golf. And that's not a good thing for anyone. Now, Rory suggested in late January, hey, it's time to bring all the players back together again, and the players who left for Liv should be granted a return to the PGA Tour without any penalty. financially. And, there was immediate pushback from Jordan Spieth and Justin Thomas on that point. So it's hard to say how long this may play out, without knowing specifics of the conversations taking place. You've got antitrust concerns. You still, I think, have tour players that want to be made whole or see live defectors penalized, even with the grants that they recently received. So, I mean, you
Which I
tell.
get, which I completely understand and agree with. I agree with, and I think it's beyond big of Rory McIlroy to say, all right, for the betterment of the product, it's time to let these guys back in and let's go forward. I'm not so sure, and I understand why there's pushbacks. Like, wait a minute. So you're just going to just open the doors back up. These other players got to leave. They've got X number, in some cases, hundreds of millions of dollars now in their bank account. They left for a matter of months. Now they're back, and we're supposed to forget all that. And they go on, and they're that much more wealthy. And I'm still scrapping along trying to make a check on tour. And I get that. I think it. Rory McIlroy is a unicorn in the best possible way. I think the guy is honest. I think he says what he feels. I think he's like Barkley in some ways to me. He's willing to live with the fallout of what he says if some people get their nose out of joint, because he's just being honest and giving his opinion. And if the opinion is not popular, or if the opinion is, going to get criticism, he's willing to deal with that. And some people are just like, I'm just going to be as vanilla as I can be. What can I say? I can open my mouth and air will come out, but nothing will be said by me. And I can just avoid all of that. And Rory takes it on. And there's no way in that sport, you're not hiding out in right field. You're not, whatever. You're not the holder for the kicker. It's a one-man engine, and you got to pull that club back and get the ball in the hole. And that's why it's unique to me. And for him to take all that on, which he did when Liv came up out of nowhere, and I applaud him, because I just don't know. At some point, I would imagine he said to his closest friends, "It's just isn't worth it. I'm becoming the one who's defending the tour, and I'm still trying to make checks on tour." So I tip my hat to him.
Yeah, it's been amazing few months for Rory, right? Where he basically said, "Hey, I can't do this anymore. I've got to, I'm sure he would love nothing more than to be winning majors, and he certainly wants to get Augusta in." But it almost looked for a while there like maybe a month or so ago, like, oh my gosh, I think Rory's going to go to Live, right? So now all of a sudden, John Rahm and Rory. I mean, now you're really talking like this story is really changing, but. Rory has since said, "Hey, I'm committed to the tour," which I think is real, and John Rahm has said that and turned around a year later and left. But I think it's real for Rory. But, this fighting could go on for a while, right? I mean, and the thing that's out there too is these PGA Tour players just got these equity grants. Now, we heard some of the numbers, and I don't know if they're real. I think somebody initially reported Tiger got 100, Rory got 50, and maybe Spieth and Thomas got 30. I
But
mean,
we all go with that like that's truth, and we don't know. But
we
yeah,
don't.
that's what I heard. Everybody heard, but you don't know unless you're Rory or Tiger or Spieth or whoever.
Right. And look, that money could turn out years down the road. That $30 million could be worth a lot of money, right? They brought in some pretty smart people through SSG, but at the end of the day, you don't know. It's an 8-year grant. 4 will vest. Once they vest, you have to pay taxes. And I think the other thing out there is you may have some disgruntled players who are like, oh, I only got 15 million. I'm going to call up my agent and I'm going to say, hey, maybe that offer from Liv looks better. So, I mean, you potentially could have more guys defecting to Liv. I mean, and I guess I'd ask you from a TV specialist viewpoint. I mean, if this really the acrimony continues and this goes on, I mean, how much of a spiral could this be for TV ratings? I mean, if this continues.
Well, I mean, I'd like to just throw in with Rory. I don't see how. To me, golf has its really core fans that they're going to watch typically. And it may not be a big overall number ratings wise, but it's going to be hardcore. I learned that firsthand. You come in as the outsider, you're perceived outsider, and you get the golf TV fans coming after you. Those are like the same people that call about like a rules violation that they saw on their television. It's intense.
Yeah.
And so if some of those intense fans are turned off by what they see, read, feel, hear, that's a bad thing. And I agree with what Rory said. I mean, you're looking at a big drop right now. The numbers weren't massive prior to this even happening. So at some point, the question becomes, what's it worth to a network to keep paying big high dollars to have the rights to cover this stuff? I mean, the Masters seems to sit in its own category, but still, everybody's looking for a rating, and that's the only way you can judge this stuff, I guess, business wise. And so, yeah, I agree with Rory. There's no way that I can't put numbers to it. That's not what I do for a living. But I guarantee every network has those people that go, hey, this is where we're losing our audience. This is why we're losing our audience. This has got to get fixed, or eventually the rights fees will not be what you quoted when Fox got in, and NBC upped it a little bit from where they were when they bought it back from Fox. So it's a bottom line business, and then that's the big boy way of looking at it, and time will tell. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's great. All right, you got twin 6-year-olds waiting on you to go play golf or baseball. So let's keep you moving here. Let's go to baseball.
Okay.
I'm going to throw out a few things. Just bear with me here, and we'll get your take on it. So you no longer broadcast baseball games, but your love, interest, and knowledge of the game are unparalleled. Maybe you can make some sense of recent issues related to starting pitchers and pitcher injuries for us. Here are a few of the facts and issues being discussed. Injuries to starting pitchers have been spiking over the last couple of years, and some big names for sure, including Garrett Cole, Shohei Ohtani, Shane Bieber, Spencer Strider. The New York Post, Joel Sherman, reports that of the 166 players who began the season on the injured list, 132, or 80%, were pitchers. So 50% of the roster spots, 80% of the injuries. Starting pitchers are pitching fewer innings by team design. Historical data has shown that hitters fare significantly better when facing a pitcher the third time through the order. Given the lower expected workload, it's been reported that pitchers are now trained to max out velocity and spin rate. MLB is concerned that the fan base may suffer as the shortened workload will lead to fewer and fewer starting pitchers. MLB is considering a reduction in the number of pitchers per roster as a means to boost starting pitcher production, while conversely, GMs are trying to figure out how they're going to cover 162 games with healthy quality pitchers. The Players Association is blaming the pitch clock for the increase in pitcher injuries, while MLB says it has the data and research to refute that claim. Joe, what's your take on all this? Is the inability of fans to associate with big name star pitchers potentially detrimental to the game of baseball? Is there a need for all parties to formally recognize a seemingly obvious injury problem and do something to protect the health of pitchers?
Yes, is the simple answer to that. I can only speak to my opinion and what I've lived through as a fan and then as a broadcaster. During the pandemic, I remember sitting here right where I'm sitting right now and watching MLB Network, and they were running games from the 80s. And I remember watching this. It was Nolan Ryan. I think it was Nolan Ryan for Houston, or Mike Scott, two stud, obviously, fireball right-handed pitchers against a young Doc Gooden with the Mets. And you can't tell me that matchup wasn't and wouldn't be celebrated throughout the sports world. Like, hey, tonight, I don't know if it's Mike Scott or Nolan Ryan. Let's say it's Nolan Ryan takes on an aging Nolan Ryan takes on a young Dwight Gooden. And it's the Astros against the Mets in the NLCS. That kind of stuff is magical to me. To me, the game is best when you have pitching 1, 2, 3, 4, and maybe a fifth starter. We all know about the Braves and the kind of pitching they could throw at you, from Maddox to Glavine to my great friend John Smoltz to Steve Avery to, and they could slot guys in and say, okay, we're going to pitch against the Pittsburgh Pirates, and it's going to be, you know, Doug Drabek is going to pitch game 1, and we want to have John Smoltz face Doug Drabek. Okay, who's got game 2 for them? Now, I remember the second to last World Series I did, which would have been 20, or actually the last World Series I did, 2021. The Atlanta Braves were injured in their rotation, but still this was kind of prevalent anyway in the game. And making a start in a World Series game was a guy who'd never started a game in the big leagues, a guy who'd pitched less than 10 innings in the big leagues, a minor league arm that they brought up. And this is not in any way a criticism of that player. My God, the guy's uber talented and he's a big leaguer. But when you go in and talk to the manager and you go, hey, you've got, I don't even remember his name, so-and-so starting tonight for you in the World Series, what do you expect? And the answer is, we hope he can get through an inning.
Huh.
Something's wrong. And so we've gotten to the point where and it drives Smoltz crazy, because not only are you devaluing how important that position is, I mean, you can name them all. The game he pitched against Jack Morris, where Morris went 10 innings in a World Series game, is legendary in a game 7. And there's so many of these examples. And now it's just like, hey, if he can't do it, or when he's done after 2/3 an inning, we'll bring in another guy that throws 100 miles an hour. And then he tires out after 2/3 of an inning. And now we're bringing in another guy. It devalues the star quality. And what bothers John the most is they all become interchangeable. There are no John Smoltzes anymore. There are no guys that you go, we need that guy. He's a 200 inning eater guy that is all world. Well, who are those guys coming up? And are they going to stay healthy? Spencer Strider is a perfect example of the Braves. He's as good as we've seen come up. Walker Buehler of the Dodgers. These guys are young, powerful, right-handed pitchers, and they break down. And so something's wrong. So there's two things wrong there. One, you're devaluing what starting pitching should and has always been about. It's about matchups. And we had an NLCS game where the Milwaukee Brewers started a pitcher just to make the Dodgers turn in a lineup against a left-handed starter, and it was Wade Miley. They pulled him out of the game after the first hitter. Just to mess around with the whole lefty righty thing. Like, we're smarter than you. And they almost won that game. It was almost like they were saying, hey, whatever it was 2 games apiece. I think it was game 5 in Los Angeles. And they're like, well, this thing's going back to Milwaukee anyway. Okay. Well, you're just giving a game away by saying, well, we're going to play games with our starting pitching, and we're going to play games with the other team's lineup. So we're going to let our guy go face one. He walked the first guy, they took him out. And then they had him come back around, but they almost won that game. I think they lost in extra innings. If you win that game, you go home up 3-2. And now all you do is need to win is one of the last 2 games, and you're going to the World Series. But they just gave it away because they wanted to play games with it. That kind of stuff is not only off-putting to the people broadcasting the game, because we're like, what's wrong with it was gamesmanship, but it's also a turnoff to fans, in my opinion. This is only my opinion. But yeah, these guys are not conditioned to pitch deep into games. They're conditioned to throw as hard as they can for as long as they can, and eventually that gives out. So how do you fix it? Go back as a sport and say, we need to, in the minor leagues, stretch these guys back out. It's going to take a little bit of time, but we need to get back to building these guys up as starters and stars of the game, because they are stars of the game.
Yeah, they are. They are. And I know your good friend John Smoltz had said recently that he's been talking about this for 10 years. You know, these guys just focusing so much on velocity and spin rate. There's just no way the arms are going to hold up. So hopefully, you know, there should certainly be some common ground between the Players Association and MLB for sure. And hopefully the owners, and they can do something about it.
It just depends on, hopefully. But you're talking about the Players Association and ownership coming together and doing something and making decisions. I don't know how you regulate it or how you legislate for it, but they'd have to come together and say, we recognize this is a problem and we want to get back to the way this game used to be. Now, when I said this kind of stuff when I was broadcasting games, and John says, Smoltzy says this stuff, the reaction by the younger set is, oh, you're a get off my lawn guy. It's all about spin rate and exit velo and all that. I just disagree.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I agree. There's got to be something. Somebody's got to rediscover the art of pitching at some point, right? El Duque and some of these guys. I mean, it's a
I mean,
great.
those guys, yeah, Andy Pettit, El Duque, in 96, Jimmy Key, an aging left-hander, longtime Toronto Blue Jay, David Cohn, those guys are like, man, who's going to face who with the Braves? It's Smoltz against Pettit. I mean, come on, that's a big sell. That's something that you can put on a promo. Tonight, John Smoltz, future Hall of Famer, takes on Andy Pettit in game 1 of the World Series. They can't do that anymore.
Yeah, yeah. All right, Joe. I had read your book, which we've already referenced here, entitled Lucky Bastard, My Life, My Dad, and the Things I'm Not Allowed to Say on TV. I read it when it first came out. I read it again prior to our interview. It was a good book. In that book, you provided some pretty good, funny stories. I'll put you on the spot here today, unless you're saving it for another book. Any good news stories or anecdotes since that book came out?
You know, my life has slowed down to the point where I'm not peeing in trash cans, calling touchdowns during an NFL game, which was in that book. I think I wrote that book as much for my mind as much as I did to sell a book. I said this to the publisher with, excuse me, my agent present. And I said, you publisher, probably, I shouldn't say this out loud, but I don't care if this book sells 1 copy or 1 billion copies. It's not going to change why I did it. I did it because I just want to get out there who I am and what I'm about and how lucky I feel I am to be my mom and dad's son and the father to Natalie and Trudy, and now Natalie, Trudy, Blake, and Wyatt, to be a good husband and to tell you what it's like to have grown up in a small town like St. Louis with a famous father and what I've tried to carry forward in my life, both professionally and personally. And that's why I wrote the book. And again, it wasn't to sell. That was never the objective and the end all. I just wanted to get it out there. So yeah, I mean, there are funny stories, but a lot of the stories that happen are kind of like you had to be there kind of things.
Yeah.
Nothing as dramatic as actually coming back from a commercial break in the booth, peeing in a trash can because I didn't have time to get to the bathroom in Milwaukee County Stadium. I mean, that's one. I've told that on Howard Stern. I've told that on Stephen Colbert. And now I've told that on the Chris O'Gorman show.
Hey, we appreciate. I will say we won't get into it, but the lobster claw in McCarver's jacket pocket, that was pretty good too.
Yeah, and only because Tim was so and I mean he was like a brother and as he used to say to his face, I'd say you're like a brother and a weird uncle to me, all wrapped up in one. But he was so, the word I would say is particular, maybe persnickety would be a good word. And I'd gotten to a dinner late and the only open seat was next to McCarver. And I was 27 years old, scared out of my mind to be the lead guy doing baseball at any network, and working with a Hall of Fame talent like Tim. And so the only seat that was open was actually next to our producer, John Filippelli. Well, I was screwing around with Filippelli and I wrapped up a lobster claw. We were at a restaurant, seafood restaurant in Boston, I think, or Baltimore. And I put it in his jacket pocket, thinking that it was John Filippelli's, because it was resting on the back of his chair, thinking it was Filippelli's coat. But I got there late because I'm late for everything. And at the end of the dinner, everybody gets up and Tim had switched seats with Filippelli. So it actually put it in Tim McCarver's jacket. And I guarantee you the look on my face must have been like, I just saw God walk through the room, because I've never been struck with fear like I was when I was like, oh my God, I just ruined his coat that he's going to wear on TV because there's butter dripping off that lobster claw. And two, he's going to punch me in the face. But he laughed. I don't think he meant it, but he laughed, and we were good.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. All right, let's get moving here. Tom Brady recently said that he would be open or be not opposed to joining a late season playoff contending team in the event of a quarterback injury. This all assumes there would not be conflicting issues with a Raiders ownership stake or his broadcast obligations to Fox. He last played in January 2023. It would be close to a 2-year hiatus and return at age 47. Is it possible for the GOAT to be an effective NFL quarterback at that point, Joe?
I would never bet against him. I feel like he said that kind of with a twinkle in his eye. I don't know that and I don't know him very well at all, but I think that would be a stretch. But if there's anybody who could do it, I would say it's him. If there's anybody who's going to stay in shape so he could do it, I would say it would be him. Would I be floored if it happened or if he came back and somehow guided a team into the postseason? No, because I think he knows with his savvy and his mind and his experience where to go with the ball, when to go with the ball, and could get through a game. Maybe if he was 60, I don't know, but I do know that he's pouring a lot of work into being a broadcaster. I'm anxious, like everybody, to hear how that is. And I think as he's rolling with that, I remember Troy. We were working our first year together, and he got a call, first or second year together. He got a call at halftime in the season opener, I think. We were out in San Diego, and when the Chargers were there, obviously, and he got a call at halftime from Andy Reid when Donovan McNabb got hurt, and the question was, would you come play for me? And I think all these guys want to be wanted, and I think all these guys want to, say, I could give it one more shot. I mean, we're all like that. But this is the NFL, and so long answer, could he do it? Yeah. Will he do it? I think all the planets would have to align for something like that to happen.
Yeah. Just quickly, in your opinion, is he the GOAT?
Without a doubt. And I say that because Troy Aikman, who won 3 Super Bowls, thinks he's the GOAT. So I will throw in with Troy, I've been with for 23 years. And if somebody who's that accomplished says, not a contemporary, but somebody who's 10 years younger than him is the best to ever do it, he knows what he's looking at. I mean, we're all fans, but yeah, he's a winner. He's just relentless. And I think that drive has made him probably more effective than he otherwise would have been. I think he's doing it more. He did it more on want to and wanting to outwork everybody than just strictly God-given ability. I think he's just one of those guys that has more hours in his day, has more willingness to get up and go run or, not drink, eat perfectly healthy, to find new ways to stay young. And I think he's the best.
Yeah, yeah. By the way, your interview with Troy Aikman on Undeniable with Joe Buck was really good. Troy's got a really interesting background.
Yeah, I mean, I was proud of him that night because he came there, and most came there to be open, honest, and talked a lot. He did about, I think we all just expect everybody's life when they reach a certain status to have been perfect, and nobody's life is. Everybody's been through stuff, and everybody's been through, in his case, I don't want to say a rough childhood, but a dad that was tough on him, and not everything's been perfect, but I think we all see everybody all polished and shined up on Instagram or whatever it is, and you think, oh, they've never had a bad day. Everybody has bad days. I don't care what you have. Everybody's got doubts. Everybody's had bad days. Everybody's thought they weren't good enough. Everybody thought they weren't pretty enough or handsome enough. Everybody, that's the human way.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. I'm going to try and condense this a little. I've got a long question, but really amazing topic. What's going on with NIL and the transfer portal? let me see if I can get through this quickly. And, I don't know if anybody can make sense of this, but Joe, you conducted a great interview with Bobby Knight in 2017 on your program, Undeniable Joe Buck. Coach Knight stated that his main obligation to his players was to ensure that they received an education so that they could go out and earn a living after college. In today's transfer portal environment, it's pretty difficult for a coach to assume that obligation with all the movement in and out of programs. Duke, the pillar of the college basketball community over the last 30 plus years, has only two players returning from this year's Elite 18. Two left for the NBA, one graduated, and seven opted for the transfer portal. I never thought Duke basketball and seven transfers out, would be used in the same context. Whether it's been admitted or not, it's probably fair to assume that the transfer portal and NIL played some role in the recent retirements of Coach K, Coach Saban, and Jay Wright, amongst others. It's probably also fair to say that Coach Knight would not have enjoyed nor tolerated the current system. Under that current system, there's no limit as to how much a player can be paid through NIL, and there's no limit as to how many times a player can transfer without having to sit out a redshirt year. That's expected to be approved any day now by the NCAA. Of course, the players, for the most part, are benefiting, and some of this was overdue. The warp speed at which this is all happening is likely due to court rulings which have forced the NCAA's hand. As a means to slowing down the transfer activity, Coach Rick Pitino and ESPN college hoops guru Jay Billis have suggested players sign contracts with the schools, with Jay adding that the contracts have buyout options in the event of a player transfer, similar to coaching contracts. It's incredible to be having this conversation at all. No one would have believed that any of this was possible 5 years ago. Joe, should we still be classifying college basketball and football as amateur sports, or have they become the most popular minor league systems in all the sports? In any idea as to how this is possibly controlled or where it's going from here?
I wish I had the magic answer to this question, because it's just, for me as a fan, it's just changed the whole game. And there's nothing that you feel like you can count on as far as who's coming back. That was the fun of college athletics. See somebody come in as a freshman, they get a little taste, maybe get a couple minutes off the bench, then sophomore they start to blossom and they become bigger and bigger stars, and then they go on to the next level. And now we all know that's not the case. And that wasn't the case even 10 years ago. Guys were one and done and whatever, and they go on to the next level. But now you can just go anywhere, anytime you can get into the portal and you pop up and there you are at another program. So it reminds me of Whitey Herzog when he walked away from the Cardinals in the late 80s or 1990. It was either 89 or 90. And he was saying, the game has changed so much. I can't tell players to hit and run. I can't tell players to bunt. It's the agents have taken over the game. And so you're telling a player who's trying to earn a contract, more money, to play a team game. And he just had enough. He's like, I'm done. I can't deal with this. And like you said, you've got great coaches that have walked away like, this is a new world. This is not something that I can deal with, because I can't really build anything. It's a house of cards, because the minute you start building, they're gone unless you're willing to, you want to pay them, or they're to the next level. So I don't know. I'm stunned that it happened this fast. Forever, I'm one of millions that have said you got to pay these guys something, because this is a job while they're trying to get through school. Coach Knight was being honest. I was at Indiana when he was there, and I was in big lecture halls in massive classes, and the only players that had assigned seats were his players. And so he meant what he said. Those guys had to go to class. If they didn't go to class, they didn't play. And so that's so far out of the window. I mean, we're talking about guys that are making money, and it's I don't know. I don't know where it goes. I don't know how you get it back. I would defer, like you said, you quoted Billis. Billis is smarter than me on this topic. He's lived it. He lives it every day. He was a player. So hopefully something changes, because this is an unsustainable model.
Yeah, it is. And, we'll leave it at that. But I think there was talk yesterday of a big antitrust settlement over NIL that's been kind of hanging over college sports in the NCAA potentially could cost them $4 billion. So looks like there may be a settlement there. And I think at the end of the day, the players are just gonna it's gonna be probably become some sort of a revenue sharing agreement. So developing as we speak without a doubt. Quick one for you on women's hoops. Caitlin Clark, unbelievable numbers for ESPN. Semifinal game, 14.4 million, 18.7 million average viewership for the final with Coach Staley's undefeated South Carolina team. Previous record for ESPN, men or women, was 5.7 million. Is the elevated interest in the women's game here to stay?
Yeah, I think so. I hope so. I mean, I just as a casual fan, really of both sides, men and women, I found myself watching more women's basketball this year than I did the men's side. And now you get to, I think it carries to the next level too. I want to watch Caitlin Clark play in the WNBA. I want to see what that looks like. I want to see how she measures up against, players in the next level that, and veterans and people who've been through it and know what that's all about. So yeah, they've got me as a fan and as a dad, of two girls. I think it's awesome. And I was proud of not just the numbers ESPN had, but the coverage and the way they went about building these stars up. And I think it's just fantastic. So if the question is, simply put, is it here to stay? My answer is yes.
Yeah, I'll say quickly, I was amazed. I had to go up, I guess it was February, to a lunch up in Palm Beach, and we had lunch up there. And guy says to me, "Hey, did you happen to see that Iowa game yesterday?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "You watched?" I was pretty surprised. He said, "Yeah." He says, "I watch all these games." And it was cool because my niece, Kim Adams, broadcast a few of Caitlin's games for Fox. So I was like, "Yeah, I was watching." I said, "The girl who did the game, that was my niece." So
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah, I was pretty taken back at how wide the audience was.
I think it's great. It made me really happy to see those numbers, both for my network, but for the sport and for women.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, question number 10. You've been so good and patient, and we're going to get you going. You were raised by two amazing parents, an iconic sports broadcaster and a Broadway actress who relocated to St. Louis to raise a family. Your childhood activities, which ultimately became your career training, are the envy of kids nationwide. You were a bat boy for the Cardinals and watched dozens, if not hundreds, of games from the press box. Direct exposure to big name professional athletes and celebrities was commonplace. You wrote in your book that you chose to go into broadcasting not because it was your dad's occupation, but because he found such joy in it. You've had an amazing career with, I'm sure, many more accomplishments and milestones to follow. Is it possible for you to hazard a guess at this point as to whether Jack or Joe found more joy in broadcasting?
Man, that's a really hard question to answer. I would say him only because of what preceded it. And that is a Depression era kid, World War II Purple Heart earner, not recipient, but somebody who was shot during World War II. Somebody who went to college only because of the GI Bill. Somebody who was told that he wasn't going to be anything, let alone a Hall of Fame sports announcer. And somebody who became just that and worked his tail off. And because he was a Depression era kid, never said no to anybody and any work assignment. He was tireless, but he loved it. I've had the chance because I got the start and the seasoning and being around my dad to do a lot of unbelievable things. But, I don't think I've done a lot of high profile things. My dad did 2 World Series on national TV. I did 24. My dad did 1 Super Bowl on national TV. I've done 6. And if, God willing, I'll do my 7th in a couple of years. But that's all drafting off him. So I think I saw it. He was at his sickest at the end of his life. And he was building himself up with naps and different things during the course of the day because he wanted to get in his car, drive downtown, go to the Cardinals, go to Busch Stadium, and go do the game. And so I think the answer is, while I've loved every second of it, I've also always felt this guilt of being my dad's son and the nepotism stuff and all that. But he was the Lewis and Clark of this thing for the Buck family. And so because of that, I would say him, even though there's nothing in my career that I haven't loved, even the down times. There's nothing in my career that's made me feel any diminishing feeling when I walk into the booth. I can't wait to get there. I can't wait to go to work. I'd rather be at work than I would be off. Same thing I would say about him. But for somebody who came out of nowhere to get to where he got and to live life the way he did and kind of devil may care attitude after getting through World War II, I just don't know anybody. It's why I said at his funeral, he went out with his needle on empty. He got to do everything he wanted to do and then some, stuff he never dreamt of doing. He lived life. And I think of him all the time because I'm like, well, what would my dad do? He'd go have fun and go do it and be responsible, but he'd live his life. And so I'd say it probably would be him.
Joe, that is awesome. I can't thank you enough. You've answered 10 questions for cancer research for us today. It is so greatly appreciated. It's been an honor and just awesome to catch up with you. I hope we've got a few golf games to go in the future.
Me
But
too.
thank you so much. All the best to you and your family. What if you take this? You take the twins out now. What do they want? Baseball, golf, basketball? What are they looking for?
One of them will play anything that you put in his hand: baseball, basketball, hockey, take shots. The other one is like, yeah, you guys go do that. I'm going to ride my bike around and then I'm going to sing Smooth Criminal by Michael Jackson. So I've got everything covered here and it's relentless.
That's awesome. You got a lot. You got some Broadway blood in you, and
That's right.
all the best to Michelle with her melanoma.
All right, buddy. Thank you. It's great to see you.
Thanks, bud. Take care, Joe.